Denise Gwen, reading aloud for you from my novel, His Christmas Eve Proposal, Book 3 of The Medicine Women of Alaska, Chapter 15. Naomi missed him something fierce, but she let 4 weeks pass before she hazarded a glance across the street at him one morning as she stepped outside to pick up the morning paper. She saw him walking into his clinic with a cup of coffee in hand, and her heart lurched a little. She longed to talk to him, but she didn't know how to approach. Ever since the emergency appendectomy, he'd been avoiding her as well, and while she understood, it did hurt her feelings. Naomi thought that they could be friends and colleagues, not lovers, even though every fiber in her soul wanted to press her body against his and kiss him. She wanted him to make love to her, and she shivered with desire every time she thought about it. And it rankled her because he'd clearly been avoiding her. During the surgery, she'd felt so close to him. She'd warmed in his presence. She'd felt on high alert and super aware of his presence at every moment during the surgery. Every time she needed an instrument, there it was, right in her hand. They moved together seamlessly. It'd been the most amazing experience in her life. And now he was hiding from her. Well, aren't you hiding from him too? It hurt her feelings, but she had to admit she understood. She'd hurt him just as much as he'd hurt her, and she knew what was troubling him. She wanted to talk to him again, and if that's all they did, she'd be fine with that. She longed to make amends. So much for fleeing all the way up here to the inside passage to avoid people. She'd vowed herself not to get entangled in any romance out here, and look at what happened. At the last possible moment, she'd realized that marriage to Ricardo would entail a life in the spotlight as a high society doyen. She'd no longer practice medicine, even though his father, Hermano, had taught her everything he knew. With every passing day that drew closer to the wedding, Dr. Hermano had started hinting that he and his wife expected her to participate in social activities that showed a person's commitment to the community. That meant chairing committees, serving on the hospital board, and, of course, giving birth to lots and lots of children to carry on the family name. Her passion for surgery was what made her tick. She loved being in surgery. That's where she felt her best, her most true self. And for anyone to demand that she give that up, well, that person didn't have her best interests at heart. She smiled with chagrin at the memory. She told Drew that change could be a good thing. Yes, change was good, so why wasn't she following her own advice? And then she wondered, perhaps he really wasn't interested in her. And internally, she just admitted to herself that she didn't want him as a boyfriend, so why did it bother her? It hurt that he'd said nothing, that he hadn't even stepped toward her for a hug or a kiss goodnight when he and Paul dropped her off at her apartment that night. And then she wondered, Perhaps he really wasn't interested in her. And internally, she just admitted to herself that she didn't want him as a boyfriend. So why did it bother her? It hurt that he'd said nothing, that he hadn't even stepped toward her for a hug or a kiss goodnight when he and Paul dropped her off at her apartment that night. It was all such a hopeless muddle.